presentation together for us. I'm really excited to hear what you have to say. A lot of effort I know went into this, so thank you so much.
Great. Thanks, Chris. So projects with the clean water service provider don't always go the way that they're designed. We're going to look at a couple of different junctures within a particular project that we had in the Otter Creek Basin clean water service provider area and see if you guys would have handled it differently. And as I mentioned to everybody except maybe Chris, we will be using Mentimeter during the presentation so that I can do virtual online real-time polling. Here's the link to it. There's a, hopefully you're seeing my screen. The code to this particular poll is here. You can also scan the QR code and bring it up on your phone. I have not used Mentimeter in a presentation before, so there's the potential for some technical difficulties, but I tested it last week and it seemed to work just fine. So we start with getting a proposal of a project. This particular project came to the Otter Creek Clean Water Service Provider base from the Vermont Forest Parks and Recreation Department. They had a proposed timber sale on a state forest. In order to access that timber sale, they needed to go through private land on an existing haul road, forest haul road, that needed some improvements. So they can't, Forest Parks and Rec approached the Clean Water Service Provider to see if the Clean Water Service Provider could take care of those improvements as part of our efforts to reduce phosphorus in the basin. We would be using their newly adopted tools to assess the roads and to assess the level of phosphorus reduction. Overall, the project was anticipated to get 23 kilograms per year of phosphorus reduction at a cost of the Forest Parks and Rec budget of $38,511. That project cost efficiency adjusted to design life, because the forest road projects have an anticipated design life less than the 15 years required, came out to $5,000 per kilogram, which is a low-cost project compared to other forest project costs according to DEC models, and a very low-cost project for the basin based on DEC cost efficiency. This is a map of where the project would be taking place. The red road segments were not meeting standards at all. The yellow road segments were partially meeting standards. This is all moving through two different parcels. With the parcel owners are related, but they're two different parcels in order to have private land. So the first question that I have for you guys is, if you are the quiz, should the project move forward? If you're a BWIC member, would you support it? So ideally, you've got that Mentimeter pulled up, and I will start seeing your answers popping up as you provide answers to me. Great. So starting at a sense that we would potentially move the project forward, that most of you would be interested in doing that. And this would be a very short presentation if we had chosen not to move the project forward. But I'm curious, from the one person that responded that you wouldn't fund the project, what your reasoning was.
Well, Mike, I'll stick my neck out, and I was maybe just a little bit too trivial in responding it, but I also wanted to see what would happen if someone voted no, and now I've found that they get put on the spot. But given that I've got the floor and that my position is not like super firm, I was starting to tap out some questions for you, which were along the lines of, how is this different from a private developer of some commercial project asking for funds to help subsidize their stormwater system? So it's really just getting at the question of equity. So it isn't necessarily that I'm totally against it, but I had questions that I would need to have answered before I would be supportive of such a project if I was on the Basin Council, because I think that's how you phrased it. And I am on one, so.
Yeah, and I called you out because this wasn't a clear-cut answer to me as the QUISP about whether we should fund it for exactly those reasons. But ultimately, it was determined to be an eligible project by DEC, and it achieves our our goals of reducing phosphorus. So because of those two standards, we did move forward with it. But I agree that this isn't really straightforward, and the draft guidance from DEC on future forest road projects puts it into question for some of those reasons. But we are going to move forward because, again, like I said, it'd be a very short presentation otherwise. So the second question is, okay, once this project is accepted, who should manage it? Should the QUIS manage it? Should Forest Parks and Rec manage it? Or should somebody else manage it? Much more even responses on this one. And more people are leaning slightly towards Forest Parks and Rec managing it, which that was our goal as the QUISP. We would really rather not be managing these projects. We want to be funding them, providing the oversight, but we want other folks to manage them. However, Forest Parks and Rec did convince us that we should manage this project because the contracting provisions in order to get it into the state system were much more complicated and would have increased the administrative costs quite a bit. That said, Forest Parks and Rec definitely has more experience with dealing with the forest road projects, with determining what needs to be done and who needs to do it and how to do it, than does the QUISP. But we ended up managing the project in-house. So we approved, the WIC approved it, we managed it in-house, we increased the budget to 40,000 to account for the additional administrative costs that the WIC would hold. And then for those things that I just mentioned about a more streamlined contracting process, the QUISP managed it. And we do have a QUISP, we've got a project, we've got a watershed ID number, and we move forward to actually get somebody to do the work, to procure services. We have two stages of procuring services. First, we're looking to hire a consulting forester that's going to oversee the project. We budgeted 18 hours for that work at $80 an hour for a total of $14.40. And then we have to hire a contractor with the big yellow machines to actually do the work. And that was budgeted at $33,570. Again, these budgets came from Forest Parks and Rec. So we reached out to a bunch of consulting foresters and received two bids back. The first bid was only for consulting forester services, which is what we had requested in our request for proposals. The rate was a little bit higher than we had budgeted at $90 an hour, and the forester anticipated 40 hours of time, which is much more than we had budgeted for. The forester included mileage in his proposal, which we had not budgeted for, which was an oversight on the part of Forest Parks and Rec and the part of us when putting the budget together. The second bid came in with a combined bid with both the contractor and the consulting forester in one bid. That wasn't what we'd asked for, but it was kind of intriguing. We weren't quite sure how to deal with it. The forester rate was higher than the first bid at $100 an hour, although the time was lower, 32 hours, but still more than we had budgeted for. And the contractor services were also higher than what we had budgeted for at $46,000, $481. So question number two is, what information would you, given this scenario, you've got those two bids, how are you going to make a decision about which one to hire? What are the most important things? And this is open-ended. You can type any thoughts into the blurb, like what would you be doing? Price. And I think you can do multiple ones if you have many criteria you want to consider. Experience. Okay. So I'm seeing a lot of folks talking about costs, experience of the forester, give him more time. We could reissue and go again. Yeah, so a lot of these questions we took in hand. Relevant experience. We met with Forest Parks and Rec to get their take on it. I think in the future, well, we went back and forth about what we would do in a future project like this, whether we would advertise for the combined forester contractor services. I don't think I have a clear answer on that yet. Forest Parks and Rec, their guidance to us was the bid number one. They were more familiar with that individual as a forester, had great confidence in his abilities. Bid number two, they just were not as familiar with the forester involved. Forest Parks and Rec also felt like that bid number one was actually asking for more time than would be necessary. And when we got to actual time and materials, they wouldn't be using all the time they had set aside, and that they felt that we could get a different contractor at the budgeted price. So we ended up going with bid number one. I think I jumped the gun, but first I wanted to ask you what you would have done. I've already told you what we ended up doing, but would you have gone with one or two? With those saying to reopen the RFP, part of the thought with that is we only had 2 responses. So my experience running projects and looking for contractors is it's hard to get people to respond to the RFP. So I'm not sure reopening the RFP would have been a good use of our time. But it's definitely an option and something that will come up again later in the presentation. So as I mentioned, we hired bid number one for the reasons that I have mentioned. They followed the instructions, the greater familiarity, and the belief that we could catch up on services at other parts, the costs at other points in the project. So our next job is to procure the contractor services, since bid number one didn't come with the contractor services. We used a simplified bid process and received 3 quotes. We had asked 6 contractors to provide quotes. 3 of them said they weren't interested at all, and we kind of had to beat the bushes to get the total of 3 quotes. All 3 of them exceeded the budget amount of $33,570. Bid number one came in at $75,875. That individual did not have workers' compensation insurance. The consulting forester was familiar with the person and knew the contractor and was comfortable with them. Bid number 2 was slightly higher, less than $1,000 higher. That bid was actually submitted by the landowner who had constructed the original road. He did have insurance, but the consulting forester felt like he would need to spend more time on site because he was less familiar with the landowner's work. Bid number 3 came in from another firm that the consulting forester was familiar with. They had the appropriate insurance, and it came in at $83,659. Now, related to the previous one and reopening the bids, remember, we beat the bushes to get these 3 bids and had 3 others that chose not to do, so that really wasn't an option. These were the folks we were going to have to go with. So the question, I'm going to come back with the same questions again. What would you look at and who would you choose? But just comparing the 3, our original proposed budget was $40,000. We're now, if we go at the lowest bid at $86,000, and if we go at the highest bid at almost $94,000. So our cost per kilogram of phosphorus is creeping up pretty much higher. We're now over the recommended forestry project costs, but still slightly below the overall cost that we would get for all projects. So again, using the Mentimeter, first off, a new question is, would you approve the budget increase if you're a book member? Because it's going to cost